Hello everybody. Next up, it's another midweek jaunt away from London up to the East Midlands, where we'll be hosted by Leicester City. Last train home leaves at 22:52, so even with the longest walk from ground to station, that should be doable if you're not actually staying overnight. So Leicester then.
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Robert. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Congratulations.
Well, not the greatest of starts to the season for them, really. It took them 7 games to pick up their first victory of the season, following 3 draws, 1 all at home to both Spurs and Everton, and 2 all at Palace, and 3 defeats, 2-1 away at Fulham and at home to Villa, and 4-2 at Arsenal. The first win of the season came at home to Bournemouth, who they defeated 1-0. This was followed by the statutory 3 points at St Mary's, where they prevailed 3-2 with a late winner against Southampton. However, that was about as good as it got, and they've lost 4 of their last 5. Their sole point in that spell coming from a 1-1 draw against Ipswich, in amongst defeats to Forest 3-1 at home, Man United 3-1 away, Chelsea 2-1 at home, and away to Brentford last weekend, where they went down 4-1. The Chelsea defeat proved to be the final straw for the Thai owners, who dispensed with the services of Steve Cooper shortly afterwards. In truth, the hiring of Cooper seemed an odd choice for them at the time. Having been promoted under the stewardship of Maresca, who promptly up sticks in the direction of Chelsea, one might have thought that a manager of similar stature might have been the order of the day for the Foxes. Now, for all I know, Cooper might be a lovely guy, but he hardly seemed to be the most inspiring of choices. One was reminded of all those clubs that kept Mick McCarthy and Steve Bruce in jobs for so many years. "Oh good, it's Mick McCarthy," said nobody, ever. It would also appear that few tears were shed by the playing staff at Cooper's departure. Straight after the Chelsea match, they disappeared off to Copenhagen for their Christmas do, with video emerging of a banner referencing how much Maresca was missed, being flaunted by the players. At this point, it should remember that Cooper was still manager, the axe not actually falling for another 24 hours. So enter Ruud van Nistelrooy, fresh from a relatively successful spell at the caretaker helm of Manchester United. The Dutchman was still a bit of a rookie as a manager. Prior to his spell backing up Ten Hag over in Salford, Van Nistelrooy spent a season in charge at PSV, who he guided to second place in the Eredivisie, before leaving due to a, quote, lack of support, unquote, from the club. Although the signing had been widely touted all week, the official announcement didn't appear until Friday evening, meaning that First 11 coach Ben Dawson was in charge at Brentford. Our match will therefore be Van Nistelrooy's first match in charge. Daisy was somewhat dismayed that she'd have to do some work, having learnt that Van Nistelrooy will inherit a squad containing 9 new arrivals in the summer, though the first of these, Abdul Fattah, it was simply the activation of a promotion-based obligation to make permanent a loan deal with Sporting Lisbon. He's out for the season anyway with an ACL injury. The first real arrival, therefore, came in the form of Bobby de Cordova-Reid, who arrived on a free from Fulham. Don't ask me why, but I was surprised to discover that the player is in fact 31 years old. I've got no idea what age I thought he was, but it wasn't that old. The other end of the age scale, they signed youngster Michael Golding for £5 million from Chelsea. Since he hasn't troubled the selectors any, we'll move on to the arrival of Caleb Okoli from Atalanta. I say Atalanta, he spent most of his time in Italy bumping around Series B and C on loan. They paid out £13 million for the Italian under-21 international. Further £20 million was spent on Oliver Skipp, who had the misfortune to start out at Tottenham, for whom he was a regular a few years back before a season-ending injury set him back. Finding first 11 opportunities limited at the toilet bowl since his return to fitness, the defensive midfielder pitched up at the East Midlands, bringing over 20 under-21 caps for England with him, including one as sub in the side that won the UEFA under-21 Euros a few years back. £5 million was enough to secure Jordan, brother of Andre Ayew from Palace. The 33-year-old veteran has been capped over 100 times by Ghana, though he's never really escaped journeyman status in his domestic career. Just the sort of player who'll score against us then. They spent another £20 million on attacking midfielder Bilal El Khanous from Belgium's Genk. El Khanous was part of the Moroccan squad that emerged victorious from the last under-23 African Cup of Soup, having hosted the event last year. On the loan front, midfield options were augmented by the arrival of Facundo Buonanotte on a season-long loan from Brighton. The 19-year-old has 2 full caps for the Argentinian national side, and he was on target in last weekend's defeat at Brentford. Odsonne Edouard was the second loan signing. He's another in for the season, this time from Palace, for whom he scored 18 in 95 league games. If you ever wanted a statistical metric for the difference between English and Scottish football, a swift compare and contrast of his respective records for Palace and for Celtic will do the trick. He played 1 fewer league game for Celtic than he did for Palace, but managed 57 goals in that time. Enough of them, let's move on, shall we, to the part I like to call the wild and wacky world of association football. Well, Cootgate continues to rumble on, the story even reaching out as far as our opponents this weekend. Jamie Vardy has been reported to the authorities for making a, quote, derogatory remark, unquote, about Coote to referee Andy Madley, who it transpires is actually a friend of Coote's. Details have been sent to the FA to consider. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is wondering exactly what could be said about someone accused of so many misdemeanours that could possibly be considered derogatory. Elsewhere, as if to reinforce the idea that the House of Lords is being increasingly populated by individuals promoted to that chamber, not despite incompetence, but because of it, we have Baron Basson of Brighton proposing an amendment to the Football Regulation Bill, whereby the government could seize control of clubs who broke the rules. Presumably his lordship is worried that clubs may be muscling in on the government's monopoly of stealing money out of the pockets of pensioners. By the way, if you're a certain age and missing your winter fuel payment, you may recall that Basson was caught out a while back, claiming £250,000 worth of expenses for a second home that he hasn't got. And so to us. Well, it's alleged that David Coote partook in cocaine. I wonder if they drug test referees post-match, because Anthony Taylor's results from Saturday would certainly have been interesting, I'm sure. If Arsenal supporters think they're in with a chance of the title, they will need to ensure that Taylor referees pretty much every game for them. He made deliberately incorrect decision after deliberately incorrect decision time and time again, to the extent that it resembled one of those hilariously bent Italian matches of the past, where you could tell from the first minutes which side had just paid the going rate. Taylor started early, giving a goal kick for a completely obvious corner. He then colluded with every dive, every time-wasting manoeuvre and con artist manoeuvre employed by the visitors. Arsenal seem to have one basic tactic, which is to overload the far post at corners. And when they don't win corners, well, no worries, Taylor can always be relied on to award them, irrespective of who actually played the ball last. Having done all that, he ignored a clear foul on Paquetá for the first. Southampton will be rubbing their chins quizzically at the ignored offside for the second goal, and the dive from Saka for the penalty was just embarrassing. The fourth goal started with a handball. The 2 goals we got must have broken Taylor's heart, but the joke penalty where Fabianski actually missed, or at best lightly grazed the player with his punch, only to see the player clutching his face as if mortally wounded, merely cemented Taylor's Man of the Match award from the visiting support. Fabianski, a yellow for that, was, well, the icing on the cake. Though his performance looked as bent as hell, Taylor probably destroyed this game for no more than his disgustingly high referee salary, making sure that any potential break from West Ham was halted either by deliberately denying advantage or by allowing Arsenal players to feign injury to prevent quick restarts. Now, the standards of refereeing in this country are already acknowledged the world over as being very poor. This is due to a mixture of general incompetence on the referee's part and a failure by PGMOL to do anything to raise standards. This fosters an institutional arrogance of the sort that is, quite frankly, inevitable when you've got a cushy number that nobody can challenge. This, however, was something completely different. This wasn't stuff just missed by an official. These were incorrect decisions deliberately given someone who clearly had an agenda, something for which he has previous aplenty. It's the Mike Dean thing. Referee wants to be the main focal point of the event and is not going to let little things like the laws of the game to get in the way. Earlier this season, Taylor was in receipt of some, quote, support, unquote, bless him, from PGMOL, for getting online abuse for a dire performance. Now, I'm not condoning such things, but I do have a suggestion that clearly hasn't occurred to anybody, which is this. Why not skip the bit, Taylor, when you decide which team you're going to help before the game, and just apply the laws in an honest and even-handed way? If you don't cheat the paying public, they won't give you stick. Radical, I know. In the meantime, maybe the good Baron Bassam might like to look at proposing something sensible for the proposed regulator to do for once, like setting up some form of proper oversight of refereeing, one preferably that does not involve PGMOL or anyone else willing to cover for Taylor and his ilk. Let's move on to the prediction, shall we? Well, as bad as we were, ours was only the second worst performance on the pitch on Saturday. Leicester will be a different kettle of fish, of course, particularly if we have an honest referee, no matter how incompetent. We have a full squad to choose from, bar Fulkrug, of course, with Kudos available once more, having served twice the length of the ban that he would have done had he actually hit anybody. On balance, I think that our defeat will have had less of a psychological effect on us than theirs did on them. So despite the new manager being in the dugout for the first time, the £2 I was going to send to Baron Bassam, heating an imaginary second home must be so difficult, will instead be going on a wager with Winston, the turf accountant, for an away win. Make that 2-1 to us, please. Enjoy the game.